What did you talk about? Marks, you're right in the middle of my picture and your mic's off.
You know what, Andy, I think you actually took notes and you had it very succinctly. So I don't mean to pass the ball, but I actually think I'm happy to give my impression.
No, that's
but
good.
I'm happy also for you to jump.
I'm happy to give feedback. So we talked about the challenge of Zoom, particularly around facilitation of teams and the distinction between kind of training or teaching and facilitation. So that the one-on-one, there can be huge advantages, but within teams, and particularly if, for instance, you're facilitating a challenging conversation, how hard, that there are real challenges to that. And so I thought Diane put it very well in terms of when we came back to say, what are we hoping for or what do we want? She talked about, well, ways to engage and be engaged and manage the costs, the disadvantages and the challenges of particularly facilitating online teams or groups online. That was kind of...
Yeah. Do you want to comment on the exact nature of the challenges? How would you summarize them?
Well, so things like, so I think that was where we got into the distinction between sort of more teaching, more head, like engaging people's heads, which was easier, particularly if people are strongly motivated to be there for their own learning, versus, for instance, facilitating a team giving tough feedback to one another, which is, even in, prior to Zoom, it's hard enough often to get a team to give really honest feedback to one another. But when you can't, the example I use is I can't sort of reach out and almost, I might not even touch your forearm and say, Julia, you know what I mean? But that thing of that we can't do that you can do in the room, and also I might be just about to give you feedback, and then just the challenges of technology and lines, or calls being dropped, or volume, or people audio being dropped, or so that was one of the challenges. And then the other challenge was when you put people into breakout groups, you don't get a sense of what's going on in those breakout groups like we do when we put people into small groups all in the room together. So it's really hard to get it's just that disconnection. Those were some of the things we talked about.
Yeah. I like that idea that you don't have the opportunity to mediate a strong message by nonverbal communication. I think that's pretty powerful. So the skill that is required with your words becomes even more extreme. And this idea that, and I don't know if I'm taking it too far, but this slightly leaky container.
Yeah.
Facilitators try and make a container that holds the group and enables this. But here we are, we're in a colander. We're not in a container. The owl and the pussycat in a colander. The DPC.
Yeah.
So how do you facilitate in a colander? Anybody want to chime in on that? Diane?
Yeah, I think just to underscore the reason for that word of being engaged as much as engaging is because a couple of us really noticed, like, we're now, I love Anthea, so we're past the honeymoon of all of this and it's here to stay. And we want to participate, and we're finding particular times when it's not joyful for us. I, for one, when I'm looking at 28 little squares and trying to navigate a whole group, then breakups and then technology, and then they're going away having all the fun, and I'm hanging out while they're working, and not all breakouts are conducive for popping in because it's very invasive on Zoom just to observe silently, like, there I am. And so, maybe there are tips and tricks for offsetting that for sure. But It just like the big question of, you know, if it's here to stay, how do we get a little bit more creative, a little more constructive, so we're making the experience good for them and good for us, because we want to stay relevant and valuable and contributing, and there's a bit of burnout. I know I'm feeling.
Exactly. Yeah, even therapy online. If I can just sort of move on that, I mean, I've done some face-to-face work recently, some big groups and some small groups. And what I noticed was that the levels of anxiety in those groups, okay, they were state-owned enterprises in very difficult circumstances. But in both organizations, I noticed that the level of anxiety meant that I was dealing with a very leaky container anyway. So online and offline, it seems like this idea of a strong container for facilitation might be slightly old-fashioned and irrelevant. Sadly, because it really worked for us.
So,
and yeah, that annoyed you.
no,
it didn't annoy me. I'm just sorry, I was on mute, but I just wanted to say to you, won't you just say that again? Because I'm curious.
You know, when we kind of came through facilitate training, and most of the people here have got thousands of kilometers on their feet in front of groups. And we kind of came through process-orientated facilitation, which I know is your methodology, and a variety of other methodologies. But for the deeper work, we were very focused on creating a container that was tight. So no one went to the toilet in the middle of the show. People weren't allowed to talk. They weren't allowed to touch their cell phones. They were encouraged to sit. I know I went to one workshop and tried to lie on the floor because I've got a sore back. No lying on the floor allowed, to keep the container tight. And all of, you know, it's like the therapeutic frame. Like we can't work without the tight container because somehow psychically it's going to hold people and allow them to talk. Now we don't have that available, either online or offline, in my experience.
Julia, is it not a question of, you know, what has the container not changed? What does contain a Zoom facilitation? And I think that's the question. And in that sense, we were sort of saying, you know, tips and tricks would be really helpful for us because everybody's learning and everybody's got different aspects. But, you know, I think we feel the leak. We feel it when we're in a colander, and it doesn't necessarily help what's happening on the screen. However, the old container isn't holding it. So what does it look like?
Yeah. Anybody got any ideas?
Sure. Yeah, Julia, I'm intrigued by what you said about maybe it's not relevant anymore, that, let me call it, hate to say it, old school way of facilitating. But my reaction was quite excited to think that there's going to be something that we can replace it with. Because I mean, I've also, as you said, had thousands of hours, days on my feet in front of a room, and you know, like what's exciting, what can we try next that's different, because people have now experienced it online, people are different. So I'm just excited, and my reaction is excitement in terms of what replaces it. I don't know what the answer is, but just throws everything on its head.
Yeah.
In terms of that tight container anyway.
Yeah. Can I offer?
Yeah, please.
It's as I observe us with this inquiry, and here we are, the people who know the most about building containers, and yet we're in this frontier of unknowns. And so one idea, just to make it practical, is to maybe name this to our groups more transparently and create co-create with them, whatever that looks like for them to feel like we know what we need as a group to hold each other in this experience. And it may have all the traditional trappings of our, you know, rules of engagement or whatever, but maybe not, because I'm sure, you know, it'll account for the realities of this form of engagement. So sometimes the better answers to what do we do are not the answers, are the questions, right? And so it just makes me think, I think I can imagine the times I've tried to create the container. It's been more perfunctory in the, I'll own it, old school way, right? I think a lot of what we've tried to do is flip what we've done well in person to online. And now we're seeing what is or isn't landing. And so just showing a slide of all the agreements and container building stuff. Okay, hands up, everyone in, thumbs up, whatever. There's no engagement really, like unless someone's courageous enough to say, hey, what about blah, blah, blah. So, but I think even just if we could say, we will have to contend with a leaky container, and this is what a leaky container is, and this is the new world, and just frame it differently, we might get more engagement in how we, that's just a thought.
Yeah, I wonder if it's not a bit like how, you know, when you have a teenager and they just get their first phone, and so to get information into their heads around the phone, you have to develop a new communication style that relies on them only absorbing 30% of the information that's coming in. Do you know what I mean? Maybe there's a different, maybe there's something around how we could live with it more fully. I know I do a lot of cooking and listening. Maybe it's this idea that we pay single attention that could change. I don't know. I think this is a useful conversation. Elise, you've got something there. Hi.
I mean, two things. One, I just want to name, and this is what often happens in online, is we've had about 3 people, maybe 4, doing 90% of the talking in the last 25 minutes. And so just naming that for those who aren't, what might have contributed to that, and those who are, what might have contributed to that. But the bigger thing that I've heard in all this is it sounds like the word I keep hearing is engagement. And it makes me wonder, what do we mean by engagement? How do we know when people are engaged or not engaged in person or online or in a hybrid environment? And what are each of us, how are we imagining engagement?
Yeah. I think that's it. That's a good way into this discussion, through engagement. You know, it's so funny because what we've just seen with the 3 people were all in one group. So in my head, in my old-fashioned facilitator's head, I was just, you know, nicely dealing with the first group stuff. Then I was going to deal with the next group and the next group. But actually, that's inappropriate for Zoom, as you rightly point out, Elise. That's an interesting learning in its own right, that you can't be working in a linear way with groups because they don't sit together. So no one can see the order or the... I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and I think in a sense, because one, it didn't occur to me that all 3 of them were in the same group. It maybe was stated, and I missed that. The other thing you brought to where my head was wondering was, for those who haven't contributed, when we were talking about, somebody made the comment, when you're in person, you can see the groups and you can see what they're doing. I'm not sure what masterful powers you all have when you're in the room with people, but I send people off into groups and I have no flipping idea what they're talking about over there. I assume they're doing the thing. And so it makes me wonder, though, is what kinds of assumptions are we making about the groups who haven't brought anything to the table about what was happening in their breakout room, as opposed to those who were first to bring what happened for them that was relevant and germane to the conversation. And a thing that I've just been really curious about a lot lately is how good, like, we know how to be good participants. How many of the people in our rooms know how to be good participants? And is that even a sign that the facilitation is going well?
It's an independent variable, because even with a terrible facilitator, the participants will get into their role. I would love to comment on breakaway groups. I've had something which is no longer secret now, I'm going to tell you, but I've stopped relying on them for anything other than building relationships. Okay, so you've brought some good stuff in here, and that's beautiful, but maybe their primary function is just relationships. And sometimes people go away and they've done no work. I know they've done no work. And maybe that's okay. I don't know.
Julia, I'm gonna disagree with you there a little bit. And it's something we're discussing in our group is, and this is what I heard from a neuroscientist, that if anything is on camera, it's not real. So it goes back to what Elise was saying, because you then behave accordingly because you're on camera, right? So the brain sort of says, oh, you're on camera, behave. Whether it's Zoom camera or CCTV. So now in the breakout rooms, nothing's recorded there. And you have maybe 2 humans you have to worry about judging your opinion versus 200. So for those people who struggle with psychological safety, in a big group, it's a problem. Because I mean, like for me, in my own experience, because my work is race work, people are not going to say what they feel like saying because you're recorded and next thing you get canceled and you're the CEO of whatever company and you said something ignorant, but it'll be taken the wrong way. So I think even virtual world, certain issues won't change. People will not speak their mind around certain issues, whether it's sexual harassment in a business or race issues, whether you're on camera or not. So I think there's a learning there to focus on the process a lot. Because if the process is wrong, virtually or in person, the whole facilitation means nothing. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, because you've sort of led me that way. But the other thing that I shared in the group is someone asked me, my ex-boss asked me, like, okay, how are we gonna do this virtual thing? And then I had to go to one of my lecturers and she said, your questions need to be better, for example, because we're so used to connecting with humans in flesh, but even virtually, if you ask a person what Nancy Klein calls an incisive question, the person is just gonna go blank because the question is so deep that it connects with this person. They'll pause for a few minutes. So then you can't ask an incisive question if you haven't listened to what the client has said. And I was saying, like, you've got, say, 60 minutes with a client. So if it's a transactional relationship, you might not listen to that person to understand where they're coming from, how they've arrived to that meeting, what state they're in. And that question, if you were listening properly, you've connected with you've engaged, if that's the term you want to use. You've engaged and connected with this person, all because of one question that came from listening. So that's a tip to say, listen better, because the question you ask the client is what will get you the breakthrough, because with coaching, the client has to decide for themselves, right? You're just there to hold space. And the other thing this lady said was body language. You need to work on understanding body language. Maybe you need to do a course if you have the time. And she even said you can watch a video without sound and assume what that person was saying. Then watch the video with sound and see how wrong you were and how bad you are at reading body language. Because we sometimes lie to ourselves that we're good at reading body language, but we're not. I mean, even listening, people say, I'm a good listener. Really? once you do like a listening course, you realize, whoa, I've been lying to myself for years that I'm a good listener. So I think if it's important to someone, it's to upskill in those two areas, listening and reading body language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody can comment on that? Thank you. Lovely. Do you think?
Sorry, can I respond to Alistair, actually, at the risk of being the person who's talking again? But to Alistair, I'm just interested in your suggestion about watch something with the sound off and then, interpret it and then watch it again with the sound on and see how wrong you are. But I do just want to offer that sometimes, what people are saying is not true. So, you could be, I just wanted to point that out. I hope that makes sense.
And if it's okay with you to just sort of follow that thread, Anthea, of authenticity. And I would love to chat about this, how people represent themselves. And this idea that people have roles in groups and perhaps they become more highlighted on Zoom. And so they sort of embody them a bit more and amplify them so that they can play the role. I recently, or a while back, had an experience with somebody who was playing a particular role that, let's say the group didn't really want, and Zoom didn't allow them to do the full body part of this role. And then it just got more, it got amplified more and more and more. And you know what it is when you facilitating face-to-face and people over-identify with roles and you want to try and pull them out, and how difficult it is, because it can get incredibly complicated if they're very identified with the role and work with the group kind of against you, and use the breakout groups as well as ways to muster troops to come back. I mean, I'm giving you a very broad kind of a feel, but I'm interested to hear from you what your experience is. Do people play roles more? Do they take on roles more? Are they more manipulative in the Zoom space? Have you seen strategies around using breakaway groups as places to work with the group? And this is not just unconscious stuff, but also when groups get bored, they do stuff like this. Anybody had any experience around this? Joe?
Just your comment around breakout rooms and building relationships, I think was very interesting, because that's been my experience, is the breakout rooms, which I've planned quite carefully with thoughtful questions around the topic or the material, what the group needs to discuss. And generally they've done that a bit, but they've come back saying, it was so nice to talk to each other. And we haven't done that in ages. And we talked about this, and this. So they used it even without permission to build relationships which needed to be built. And people had missed each other, not seeing each other at work. And so I think I had underestimated how useful those breakouts are to build relationships. And maybe the facilitator goes into the session knowing that and planning for that and allowing for that and allowing more time. My experience is breakout rooms are never long enough. Mm. People have always, that kind of go for 15 minutes, grab a coffee on the way back to the room and let's carry on. 15 minutes in the breakout room is never enough. People want more time. Maybe it's the nature of how people have had to work from home, but the building a relationship, I've certainly underestimated in terms of using that as a looser tool.
I love that, Joe, because it suggests that maybe this colander is just relationship, and that to make a colander functional, we should just have lots of relationship building sessions to keep bolstering the colander or the container for the group. I don't know. I'm just being a little bit of a winger.
No, Julia, I think you're right there, because if you really look at it, do we really know our colleagues? This is like pre-virtual world. You think you know someone. I mean, we in my previous company, we had someone who unfortunately committed suicide, and we thought she was just uptight, didn't want to say hi to people. But she was going through stuff, but we didn't know. And this is pre-virtual world, remember? And this virtual world and putting people into breakout rooms, it's like you forced people to connect. Now you're seeing your friend's background, they've got a guitar. Oh, you play a guitar. But you never had an opportunity at work to really connect with your colleague as a human. So I think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, but also it can be incredibly posed.
Excuse me?
It can be incredibly styled, the background.
That was just an example, but yeah. I think there's more of that stuff Joe was talking about, where people are just connecting as human beings, because at the office, you're kind of forced to behave. Focus on the job.
Well, I think that's also another clue, is that, with the Great Resignation, I'm busy putting a presentation together, a research piece, looking at the relationship, why are people resigning? And a lot of the reasons why they're resigning are stuff to do with values. So they're kind of post-conventional maturity ideas. They're a lot to do with not wanting to give up their life for work or be controlled by work, and have a lot kind of more autonomy, and do things that are more local and easier, and commit to their families, and so on and so on. But I'm wondering if this doesn't give us a clue about how people want to be managed and led in a Zoom room. If that's the kind of the trend, then I suppose I sit with a lot of situations in my life where I don't know whether to just let the group run with it, or to try and hold it in the frame I'd set. And I know broadly, like if it's a very conventional group, then I keep it structured. If it's post-con, they can go wherever. But I think that there's something around, if there's this great resignation because people want more autonomy, and here we're putting them in Zoom rooms where we're trying to control them more, that's not going to work so well. How do we build autonomy into the Zoom room a little bit more?
Well, I mean, so, I mean, there are a couple of things that are standing out to me. And one is, I mean, just on that point as a tip and trick, one way to build in that autonomy is to say, hey, we're going to put you in rooms, but you all have the option to leave and go to a different room, as you would if we had multiple little groups in the room here. So you can do that, is flexible in Zoom. Yeah. Beyond that, I mean, I guess I just keep hearing lots of assumptions coming up. Well, people aren't going to, this context means, and if you just know how to read people, as I've been watching, and Thea, you're doing a beautiful job of modeling this. You've got your hand over your face. Throughout this, I've had my hand over my face, Margs has had her hand over her face, and so has Joe. I would venture to guess we all had it over our face for a very different reason. And I would venture to guess each of you watching interpreted it in some way, as either we're distant and checking out, or we're very thoughtful and wondering about a thing, or something else. And so what it's made me think about is this idea that we can have all the heuristics in the world, but if we don't check in on them, it like we would with a client when we see, you know, a letdown or a difference in how they're showing up. If we aren't checking in to see how they're making sense of it, we're not any better in the online or the in-person world by having these heuristics available to us.
So how Elise, I love that. And how would you suggest we do that? Is that
I mean, I think it depends. It depends on, you know, you talked about the container in the frame and how are we framing it? It might be, I'll pick on Mark's because I haven't heard her speak in a while, is it might be checking it and saying, Mark's, it looks like something might be going on for you. Is there anything you want to bring to the conversation? Or doing the check-ins, which I haven't heard on this call so far, of, you know, Pete, and I'm gonna, is it Sabine? You know, anything, any voice you want to bring to what we're talking about here, like doing some of those check-ins and giving people the option to, you know, there doesn't have to be any voice you want to bring, but inviting them in and doing those check-ins. So Pete, Sabine, anything you want to bring to the conversation?
I'll let Sabine go first.
Thank you, Pete. And thank you, Elise. I appreciate how you're bringing this up, and I'm actually usually quite a fan, just to offer my personal flavor, to have these like sort of rounds of making sure that, you know, in the first cycle of discussion, a lot of voices are heard. It also gives me some relaxation as to say like, okay, am I gonna step up and raise my hand and say something, or is it more gonna be like my turn will come and then I'll just speak whatever I have? But I'm enjoying listening to this conversation. Pete and I were checking in together at the start of this, and I think 50% of our talk was getting to know each other better, which I really appreciated. We hadn't done a breakout room together before, I think. And just where I am coming from, I haven't done any online facilitation with groups or teams. I've just been coaching online. And since I started coaching, this profession has grown during COVID for me. So I've never even had the opportunity to consider an in-person practice. So I'm kind of here today with, I think, the reverse side of things. So I'm enjoying a lot how I've had the circumstances to coach online, but I'm working one-on-one with clients, and I don't really have any hiccups or issues with that. And at the same time, I am very curious, and I can imagine that there's so many more challenges if you're working with multiple people, and especially trying to build relationships in teams. So I think it's, for me, kind of like future inspiration that I'm trying to gain here. And at the same time, I'm kind of sitting with what I found most interesting is that I kind of had the idea, you know, if some point we kind of get over this COVID wave, or it integrates in a way that we can see each other quite in person, like normal again, that we would return to the quality of in-person work like before. So maybe that's a little bit naive, and I haven't been dipping my toe a lot into these in this kind of work. But it's interesting to hear how many voices in this room are saying that it's going to be reshaped, because it's not going to be the same like before. I'm keen to go into organizational work in the future. So this is all really useful for me to kind of hear, like, I thought I would just do that in person as much as possible. But maybe there's even ways to do it well, hybrid or online. I hadn't really considered that before.
Thank you. And thanks, Elise, for making that passageway, opening that door. Thank you. Pete, I'd love to hear from you, and then I would love to have a conversation about this.
Yeah, so I was actually having a really kind of cool conversation with myself as to, observing self as what was going on, and I'm not taking part, and why am I not taking part, and actually quite cool. So I was enjoying that space. So very happy to contribute, but I was also, and I was trying to listen deeply as well. And acknowledge I'm a reforming, appalling bad listener in the past. So focusing on the listening rather than jumping up and down like the 7-year-old with a soccer ball saying, pick me, pick me, pick me kind of thing. So in terms of that, and I was just also processing a lot of the parallels of, I think most of the themes that Sabine and I had discussed had surfaced from that group. So it was also just latching onto that. What I offer as sort of slightly different perspectives is, I've often found with groups that just pairing people up, the equivalent of a face-to-face breakout room, it's a huge amount of the shift in the team often just comes from that. And the most dramatic example that I can share is 2 people who'd worked together for 8 years within 200 meters of each other had never had a conversation that was not directly work related, had very few face-to-face conversations and relatively few telephone conversations. It was all email. Okay. In 8 years, I found that truly mind-blowing, but it is what it is. And I would just like to maybe segueing into slightly different, but the one area that I've found really battled with, which I would just like to hope that we get to, is the equivalent of match work with the Enneagram, which if anybody's got any tips and tricks for facilitating that, I would be really interested to do that, because it's one area I've just not found anything that comes close.
Yeah.
Can I just point out something at the risk of being challenging, but I just noticed, so when Pete started talking, Elise posted some really valuable stuff in the chat. And it just highlighted for me, I was aware of then wanting to read Elise's thing, and I couldn't then, to be honest, focus on Pete's comments. And it just occurred to me that I haven't done anything around saying, you can't chat when people are talking. And I just realized how I was so torn between, like, who do I, and I've only got one brain. So who do I follow? I was just so struck by that. And I realized I haven't done anything. I haven't set any boundaries or limits around that in the past. And in fact, so anyway, it was just a real light bulb moment for me. So I just wanted to offer that.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I find in like meetings that are boring, it's really handy when people post stuff on the side, as but when people are talking about personal, there is that conflict. Thank you for that. There's just so many opportunities for more discipline everywhere. It's quite exhausting. Could I ask a question which kind of relates to where we're going or where we've been? And like, that idea of engagement. What is engagement? What is enough engagement? Is it like everybody engages, or is it, or how does it work? Because that speaks to a whole lot of stuff, like the facilitator's role. What is the facilitator's role? Is it to enable something through a facilitated process, or is it to, it's a really interesting debate. I've got no answer. Joe, yeah.
So you have to forgive me, but I'm sitting here thinking, first of all, about the big slab of Toblerone in my drawer, which I'm actually dying to eat. And thinking, I'll show you, it's right here. My brother just came from Germany and brought it for me.
Yay, I'm coming up the road. You two roads down, hey.
So my thought is going, if I could turn my video off and my sound off and eat my Toblerone, I would be more engaged. I mean, I'm actually really quite engaged. I'm enjoying this and I'm engaged. But if I actually am dying to eat my Toblerone, and I quite like to eat and work. And if I could turn my video and my sound off and eat it, I would be more engaged. But it's actually not, certainly in this group, acceptable to do that. Quite often I like to turn my video off because then I can listen and draw and fiddle, but I'm very engaged because it's an interesting call. But I hate it when my participants turn their videos off because I think they're disengaged. So how do we practically understand engagement and permit people to do different things, knowing that they're adults and they might be engaged? So I might be eating my Toblerone, but I'm fully present. In fact, I'm more present, where you might all have assumed that I was actually just gone to feed the dog. So what are the behaviors that we expect of people which are actually not valid?
Can I tie in here?
Yeah.
Just the things that come into my mind is maybe it is acceptable. And if I think it ties into what Elise was saying, to just inquire and to notice, and maybe to make that a little bit more explicit. If we would know that about you, and if you would have checked in today, or we would just generally know that about you, then I would understand if you will be gone for 5 minutes and we could still see your name in the list, that you will be doing that. And then we kind of trust that that's happening. And I think for a lot of other people, it's similar as well. And I've been in a training with someone who was just saying, I've been on my computer all day. I have a little bit of a headache just looking at the screen a lot more. So I'm just switching off, but I'm still here. If you know that, then you can trust that. So just making, again, like the interpreting and the assuming, making it very clear and discussable. I could see a lot of possibility there that I could, as a co-person in the group, be okay with that.
And Thea, go ahead.
I think for me, again, it comes back to what Diane spoke about, is when we sign up for something and our commitment. So I've certainly facilitated some teams on Zoom where not everybody has wanted to be there. And so I'm just reflecting, Sabine, on what you're saying. So I'm imagining that each one of us has chosen to be here in our kind of private personal capacities. So the level of trust, I think we can assume, we're much more trusting. I'm trusting of everyone being really participative and present, whether their camera's on or not. Whereas certainly my experience in some of the teams that I've facilitated is that when people have been off camera, as the facilitator, I've been pretty sure that they haven't been engaged because, for whatever reason. So I think that's a big difference around buy-in and commitment. And maybe it speaks again to smaller groups. I don't know. That's one of the suggestions that came out of our group, was smaller groups. Thanks, Elise.
Yeah, I think, what you're raising for me is kind of this notion of explicit and implicit, because Joe, as you were talking, you said it's unacceptable in this room to be off camera and eating. And it made me wonder, what makes you say that? Like, how did you come to find that it would be unacceptable in this group? And I say that not, I'm not necessarily asking you to answer that, but it makes me think about my own choices and, what I feel comfortable doing in a group, which I did in our breakout room. I went off camera and I went off voice because my parents called, and we've had a lot of medical issues with them. When they call, I answer. I go off whatever I'm on to go do that. And those are choices that nobody said, hey, you can do this, but I've made a choice to go ahead and do it. And so we're all making those little moves and assumptions explicitly or implicitly. And what does that call on us as facilitators to do or not do that would enable greater autonomy and greater choice in the matter?
Yeah, I think these are fascinating conversations, and I want to throw in that adult development model as well. Often people at earlier stages are looking for a stronger leader that's more like a kind of a daddy figure where there's rules of engagement, and encouraging them I was thinking maybe we could encourage people to, like how we work with safety in groups, keep yourself safe, find a way that makes your learning comfortable. It's your responsibility, not mine. So you could do that kind of approach with later stage people, but earlier stage people are looking for rules of engagement. But I suppose also even like here's Joe, and me, like, can I eat and drink on what is the protocol? And how much of my life should be in here without it being distracting? I know that what we do is videos have to be on for our groups. And that's tricky. Then people have Wi-Fi excuses, and then let's just say 80%. But, these are corporate groups. So
Can I ask, what has you require it?
we ask them, we say, please, can you turn your camera on?
No, right. But what has you feel like requiring them to have their video on supports the program, or what's the reasoning behind you must have your video on?
I like, so firstly, some of them I've never met face to face. I want to see what they look like and their peers as well. And I still read faces a hell of a lot. I might not do anything about it, but I still read faces. And yeah.
So I asked for a couple of reasons. One, I think, and then just reacting to what I'm hearing you describe, that's your need. And it's important to you and it would help you. It makes me wonder how useful might it be to share that with participants so they can see how it is supporting them as learners. And then where is it, maybe where, what space can you create? Because I think some people do really want the rules. Am I supposed to have my video on in this? Am I not supposed to have my video on in this? And those kinds of things. And I think one of the things over the last 18 months that I've gotten way more comfortable with is saying something like, if you're in a position to be able to have your camera on, we sure would love to see your face. It helps us as facilitators be able to engage and see, what's landing, what might not be landing, and when you might want to speak and we can't see that. And so, as a general rule, if you can have your video on, we sure would like that. And we also understand some of you are in positions where your video is not going to be possible. And, we'll trust that you are going to get what you came for in this program, and ask for what you want or need. And so saying those kinds of things up front, I feel like gives them some choice in the matter, but also highlights to them, here's how it can be helpful for us as facilitators and for you as a participant.
Yeah, nice. I mean, it is primarily my need and also other participants. It is primarily my need and my own need to be useful, and my need for visual, when actually, I mean, I think it's quite a developmental kind of thing to only be auditory.
Sorry, I'm smiling because that could be a really fun experiment. What if the next supervision was completely videos off?
Yeah.
And what do we notice differently? Pete, we would miss Pete's hand for sure.
But not Alistair's, because he's got the green one that comes up regardless of video.
So can always do that, at least. It's just a really interesting, a guy who trained with me, and he was saying how for the first time he'd been forced, because of bandwidth issues, to switch off video. And he realized how much, one, he relied on body language, but secondly, how much he was distracted by it. And it unleashed a whole new layer of coaching for him when he could only coach on Audible. So, I really believe that our role as coaches, we have to be adaptable and become nimble in the moment. And these are all hackneyed words, but you know, I've had 3 bandwidths or 3 network changes in this conversation.
Sure.
All right. Because of, I guess it's load shedding somewhere in the system, and I'm having to change service providers. And I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. I'm just saying, if that's what works in the moment, that's what works. If Wi-Fi goes down and cell phone WhatsApp calls the only way you do it, that's what you have to do. And how do we learn to accept this is what I'm dealing with right now and become absolutely present, and what is going to work best for all of us right now? Is it video on, video off, WhatsApp, whatever?
Yeah, I think it's a lovely discipline to develop. I think that's really interesting. I used to do therapy on WhatsApp, both, you know, my own and for other people. I wonder if that helps also with the authenticity thing, because sometimes there's a lot of visual stuff that's distracting.
Alistair, did you put your hand up to bring something to the conversation, or was that just for fun and play as we were messing around with hands?
No. I want to share something, and it's that, yeah, it's a bad way to say this, but this is the best time to be alive because everybody's going through trauma, right? So now, whose trauma is more important than the other person's trauma, right? And I'm saying that because if I want my camera off, I want it off. If I want it on, I want it on. But there are people who prefer to see you on camera. But for me to be engaged, sometimes maybe I've moved in lockdown and my background wasn't looking cool at a particular time. So I think I had that fake one from Zoom and people had issues with it. They're like, we want to see where you're at. So you can't really please anyone in the world. But I think because everybody's going through a lot right now, it's an opportunity to understand the other. You know, just because you like sushi and I like chicken, it doesn't mean, you know, I have to like what you like. So it's the opportunity for human beings to understand each other, to give each other empathy, to say, I prefer to see beautiful faces, but someone's gonna put it on black and that's their choice. And I think that's the beauty of the time we're living in now. It goes back to the topic of polarity. If somebody doesn't want to vaccinate, they don't want to vaccinate. If you want to vaccinate, you want to vaccinate. That's your choice. But something I learned this year, I went to a couple of coaching classes on Gestalt theory. The biggest takeaway for me there is data. You know, it's like saying there are 20 people on the call, 5 had cameras off. It's data. No judgment, it's data. Now you as a coach, that's where you earn your money. Ask that person, oh, I saw you off camera. Is everything okay with you? By the way, my husband beat me up because apparently gender-based violence has gone up. Now you've got data. But if you come in with a judgment, I'm just giving an example, you know, nasty example, but the fact that someone's on camera, it's data. The fact that they're not on camera, it's also data. And that's what the coach is supposed to do in holding the room, right? To understand the dynamics. Because the rules sometimes, what's the purpose of the rules? Someone can be very engaged, give a meaningful contribution off camera. And I've seen it. And it goes back to the issue of questions. If you are virtual or in person and you ask the wrong questions as a coach, you were never going to get the result you were supposed to get because you never listened, you know? So yeah, we all have preferences, but what is the process requiring of a coach? It's the questions that we ask our clients. Even if they're a head type like me or a heart person like other people, you ask a question that makes them get into their heart. You know, that's kind of what I've seen in my, how many months as a coach? 6-7 months. That's, yeah, over to the next person.
Joe. Yeah.
Alistair, I just love what you brought up about the vaccine, because as you were saying it, I was thinking it. I've had such a angry reaction to this vaccine mandate and the mask mandate. And I was thinking, you know, cameras off, cameras on, mask off, mask on, and this whole telling everybody what they must and mustn't do with all of the complexities. Just to relate it back to telling people to put their cameras on and off, I'm thinking, yo, if as a facilitator, I'm being a bully by telling people to put their cameras on, as I felt bullied by people telling me what I must do around COVID, I'm thinking, sure, maybe I need to rethink that. So I think it's very nice comparison. I hadn't realized that maybe my assumptions about what you must do with your camera is okay, and maybe it's not. I'm so sorry. Please will you forgive me if I leave? I've just got 20 minutes before another meeting. So I'm desperate to go and just say hi to my daughter who's just walked in and regroup.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Do you get some Toblerone as well?
Yes.
Oh, I plan to.
I'm coming around.
Thank you. Please excuse me.
Thank you. Can I introduce a question, or are there other things lurking? The thing that's been sitting with me, and it's been a great learning session for me, is about the role of the facilitator. Do you, because, okay, so I've felt in me quite a lot of anxiety about holding the group in like that very old-fashioned way, that I needed to hold the group, limit the voices, or maximize, you know, all those old-fashioned things. And now Joseph's used the term bully camera, and I can totally take that on the chin. My question is, obviously it's group dependent, but would you be more structured and hardcore and controlling of a group on Zoom, or less, as a general rule? And when other co-facilitators pop up, you know, that's always a lovely sign, because you can't see everything. So, you know, that's a mopping up system that's in operation. You know, using that better, that yeah, Sabine.
What I'm just taking away from this is there's no one size fits all, and there's no general approach that you can take, especially from the diverse responses and ways of thinking what we've seen today in this relatively small group. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to build in that kind of pre-conversation around format. The first idea that came into my head, but that's very me, and I don't know whether that's very practical or it could backfire, but literally to have a questionnaire sent out if you're doing a facilitation process with people for a few days, that just send them something around form. Do you know, how often do you want to break? Do you need to eat? Are there any health issues or family issues I should be aware of? Just that, so you as a facilitator would know about that. You wouldn't take offense if someone leaves or pops in or out. Maybe even very practical things around, you know, do you have challenges with your Wi-Fi or not? and also to ask, like, what do you need in order to engage better? So for me, for example, like body work is really important, to be able to move and like have very like every hour a break to at least stand up or go to the toilet. Those are small things that can make a huge impact. So I'm just wondering whether it would help to have like questionnaires that only you as a facilitator would assemble, and then maybe you could address it for like 2 minutes at the beginning of the session if you see there's themes or commonalities, and also have this build in around, you know, I can't satisfy everyone with the program, but I'm trying. Or whether something like polling would help if people, because, you know, polling could feel unsafe again if you have to do that live in a way. But I think those kinds of very small tweaks and suggestions could tell you so much. And then, yeah, you don't have to work from, okay, what should my approach be? But you can actually resource from the data that you get from the participants. So I'm curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts around this, to what extent that could work or could not work.
Yeah, I'm aligned to that 100%. Like the polling part and asking questions, because the data is the data. If 15 out of 20 don't want to be on camera, it's data. It might mean something, and that's where the coaching comes in. What if there's an aggressive boss people don't want to face? I mean, some people don't want to go back to the office because, and I worked in a company before where the guy who called the intervention was the problem. He thought we were the problem, you see? And, you know, so look at the data as a coach of who wants to be on camera or off camera, whatever the situation is, from your questioning and your polling, then that kind of gives you what to expect in that facilitation prior you get into that company, because every company is different, leadership styles are different, the staff members are different, levels of maturity are also different, you know, but the data will always be the data. You know?
So, you know, that's why working with the Enneagram in these groups and the maturity stuff in these groups is much easier than just a blanket, because you've already got a fix on who's in the group. And you've had a one-on-one with them. And I just want to take what you said a little bit further, Alistair, and ask the question, you know, when you're working with groups, there's so much contextual information in their behavior. And you don't know where that information comes from. Is it the boss? Is it how they've been brought up? You know, where the hell is that coming from? It sounds to me like it's a lot more overt in a Zoom room. So when you're working with a Zoom room, you've got a lot more variables coming in affecting behavior. So you actually can't read it so cleanly. So when the Zoom light's off, it's because the child is sick or they've been punched, or whatever. It could be that, or it could be they hate the boss, or they have bad Wi-Fi. You know, it's so, what's the word they use in therapy? It comes from so many sources. So in a way, the fact that it comes from so many sources disrupts the information as well.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, isn't that where we earn our money? Deciphering all that complexity for the client. Because now if somebody's being abused by their husband at home, that's now a business issue, because she's working from home, but she's now, you know, being affected and she can't be on camera. That's data. Or maybe she had a bad hair day. We don't know. But it's looking at the data first. And as a coach, you start questioning, how can a company of 200 people have only, you know, 2 people on camera? Everybody's black.
It's a culture. I think it's overdetermined is the psychological term for a behavior that you cannot find one single causal kind of element.
I don't know. I think over the period of facilitation, the real juice will come out if done properly. But you have the data, not your assumption to say, Alistair's rude because he's off camera. Not you, Julia, I'm just saying anyone. I'm just saying when you start from there as a coach, the whole process gets muddled up, you know, because if people are comfortable to show up, at least they showed up off camera, it's still data. Let's work with that data, you know, because everyone's in different environments, etc. You know.
Yeah, Marks, what do you think
About what Alice is saying?
Yeah, can you draw straight? I mean, how do you work with this overload of the behavior has so many more origins on
Yeah,
Zoom?
I don't know whether I have anything hugely of value to offer directly in response to Alistair. What's going through my head is that one of the things that's come out very strongly is that there's this increasing need for expression of autonomy, it seems. You know, if I want to turn off my camera or do whatever, I want to be able to do that. Elise's sort of demonstration about, you know, how we could set that up, addressing the needs of the facilitator and the group, I thought was very fluid. And I thought was accessible for people who feel strongly about that autonomy and for people who might feel more wanting the connection. And so I appreciated the demonstration of that, Elise. But I'm sort of, as I said, the thing that's going on in my head is with COVID, what's happened? We've all gone home. We're all living in our environments. We're managing our environments. This is my space. There's less in it. I was going to say less adaptivity. There's lots of adaptivity. It's just got a different expression. And where do autonomy and responsibility to collaborative to the whole? That's what's going on in my head. Like at one point, it might suit me to do whatever. At what point is that a disruption to the whole? And do I need to consider that? And I don't have an answer to that. But I feel like for me, that's one of the things that's coming up in facilitation. You know, do I defer to just absolutely respecting that? At what point?
Yeah.
How do we deal with the collective? I don't know. So that was what was coming up for me, you know, as we in the whole conversation.
Thank you. Lovely. Is that you waving, Pete? You want to?
Yeah. So an insight I had, which I share because it may be useful to others and hopefully it builds, is, and it was quite a surprise to me, is I sense I'm holding myself to a lower standard on Zoom because there is no best practice. And I see that in a positive way because it's allowed me to be more fluid.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm listening here, what's best practice? What's best practice? And it's not that it's invalid, but we don't know. We're pioneers. Just try it.
Yeah.
If it feels right, try it.
You know, we had a couple of sessions, 5 sessions ago, when we spoke about the impact of Zoom on relationships. And one of the outcomes of that session was this idea that we are more likely to objectify others and dehumanize others if we only interact with them through Zoom. And Pete, not to skim over the idea of the best practice, but just to pop back to Marx and this idea that if Zoom creates a tendency to dehumanize others, we might have less responsibility around the group. I don't know.
Can you just say that one more time?
So we had this discussion. So if you only meet and interact with people behind a screen, there is an increased tendency to treat that person as an object, not a human. They're a colleague, they're a participant, because it is so hard to get to the human part. and in a context that supports the objectification of other people in the group, how will that influence people's decisions around taking actions for themselves or the group? So if they don't think the group are human or nice, or they could discount them in various ways, then it's going to lead them down the pathway of making actions and conversations that serve them. It's just another one of those paradoxes to be managed. Me and the group, me and the group, me and the group.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, those are the things that come up. I think the thing that was coming up for me, and it's something, and a concept that just I was reading about in a book by Sidal Neely. It's The Remote Work Revolution, and she talks about the idea of psychological closeness. So we talk a lot about psychological safety, and this just was a different spin to that idea. And her assertion is that as long as you're building these remote and hybrid spaces to support psychological closeness, it's not so much, is it, you know, are people just objects in it? You're creating a closeness with them. And I can say even before COVID, there are a number of groups that I have only engaged with online and never met in person. And they don't feel like objects to me so much as interesting people to talk with about ideas. And so I think some of what you're bringing up for me is, one, how do we prioritize psychological closeness? And two, what are the contexts we're playing in? You know, Alistair, you've talked a lot about the topical conversations you're likely to have in your space. I can imagine that being different in the DEI space than some of our other spaces where we're talking about a different topic. So what is the context under which you're bringing people together, and for what purpose? And then how do you design around that? And what does that suggest to you about this paradox of me and the group and some of the others that we play in?
Mm-hmm. So it calls for discipline and flexibility.
Julia, I'm just going to pass a judgment and say, I don't think anyone would want to be off camera unless there's something really going on, except for people with Wi-Fi issues. Unless it's a one-day event, then you can't really get them on camera. But through a process of like 5 sessions, eventually they'll come on camera through coaching. I noticed you've been off camera for 2 sessions. Can you tell me more about that? You know,
yeah.
Then in that coaching, the stuff comes out.
Yeah.
You know,
there's ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think there are habits in organizations that one facilitator coming in and working in a government agency where there's a habit where people have, you know, there's a habit. Sometimes it helps to be straightforward. But I take your point and thank you. Yeah.
And going to what's good for the group, right? What Mark said, very important. And most of my employed life was just for the money. And I've got many people who are like me. And if you really ask people, do you really know the values of your business? Back to the data issue, before you do the intervention in a business, ask them, your company's value is, you know, it's common in Cape Town, family-oriented business, right? What does that mean for you? We're an open door policy company, you know, but zero psychological safety, right? The door is open, but it's not open. But in that questionnaire, the engagement survey you send in the beginning, if you're going to take that route, the data will be in there. And they'll say, yeah, his door is open, but it's never open. That's where people now end up not buying into the benefit of the group. It becomes me, autonomy, then they leave because the leaders are not in tune with what's really happening for those employees. So for me, if someone's off camera, unless they've got some major issues going on, they maybe don't really want to engage. And that's an opportunity for the coach to investigate further why this employee is not engaging or this leader is not engaging. And that's where the true transformation happens, because coaching, in my opinion, is a process, not a once-off thing. And if the process is done right, that person will be, overactive like I am now.
Cool. Thanks, Alistair. Sabine.
I have two not very related things, if I may. One is maybe a podcast or book tip around this topic by Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. It speaks about a lot of the themes that we discussed here today. And I think especially the making things clear around the setup and the intention and the purpose of a meeting and how you format it in order to make sure that every person that will attend knows how to be the best participant according to what the intention is of the meeting. And I really like that, just make it as clear as possible on many different levels as to the content, as to who's there, what you're supposed to do, what is expected of you, to make that explicit. And I recommend the podcast with Brene Brown, where she interviews Priya Parker on that, and they actually do a meeting makeover. And I think it extends very nicely into the online domain as well. And then a question that I have to you, Julia, is, are you the one that decides on these themes for supervision every week?
Broadly, yeah.
Okay. Last week, I think a few moments at the beginning of the meeting, you spoke a little bit about your personal reasoning around bringing up the topic of self-love. And it's just like a few words that you shared around that. And I was curious for today, how did you decide to time this theme for today's meeting? And was there anything that you were looking for?
Thanks, Sabine. There's something I'm really working with at the moment. The one thing is, I have gone through very radical transition in my life recently, and my self-care has really got quite shocking. And what I've noticed is that I need more self-care for Zoom than for normal facilitation. I love being terrified in front of a group. And because of that fact, I can facilitate on no sleep for 3 days. Also, because I'm shit scared, and I love that. I don't know why, I don't know what terribly disruptive childhood I had that has made me such an adrenaline junkie, but that keeps me awake. And I find the self-care required for Zoom is huge, and I'm not doing it. The other thing is I've been facilitating for like 28 years, and I built up some skills around dealing with participants who take on roles. And I've had, like, I'm reasonably experienced. I'm a psychotherapist. I've been coaching since 2000, and I had an experience, which is a common. It was like a very so face-to-face, I can sometimes pull off very sophisticated maneuvers that help people boundary themselves, acknowledge something, and help them to be more productive in the group. And I blew it. And other people might say I didn't. But what I'm finding is that the very sophisticated, gentle maneuvers I'm struggling to do, and I don't know if it's because I'm so tired at the end of a long year, or because a different skill is necessary. Anthea, I think I just know you do this kind of, those maneuvers in process-oriented psychology. So you have someone doing something in the group, and you need to work with it and bring a truth home in a beautiful way that makes sense and doesn't let the group turn against the person, you know. And I would love to be able to make those moves again. And I'm struggling.
So I'm sorry, I'm aware, I mean, I've got a dog who's gone through my waste paper basket and is making loud chewing noises, but I've also got some bang, some hammering. Can you all hear it? Is it distracting? You can hear it.
Give me some
yeah.
help.
So I mean, Julia, I can empathize. I mean, around also wondering, is it for me a personal piece about a long year? I've had, I think, similar transitions to you. So in fact, it feels like it's been a long, big 3 years or 4 years or something. But then also just so I have to be honest, when Diane spoke about kind of that in a way Zoom is here to stay, my heart sinks, because there is a part of me that and maybe that there are, so I suppose that's part of why I'm here, maybe there are skills to learn, but there is a part of me there around, I don't seem to have found the way to challenge with compassion and respect, but to challenge on Zoom in the way that I can do face to face. So that's something that I sit with. And when I've worked face to face again recently, in fact, I had a client say to me, you know, Anthea, when you said about the difference of face to face and online, I didn't quite believe you. But having worked with you now face to face, I like totally get the difference. So I'm hoping that we have some kind of hybrid, and that we can do a whole lot of stuff online, which I was doing face to face before, which was unnecessary, but that the big groups, or not big groups, but the more challenging group stuff, that we go back to doing that face to face. That's my hope. I don't know if that answers your question, Julia, but that's.
I think it just puts it to like maybe some sort of empathic connection that validates my personal and professional space, and I'm grateful for that. You know, I remember workshops 5 days on the minds, same people, same 25 people for 5 days, psychodynamics for 5 days. Day one, somebody would take me on and start punching me. And I would hold the line. Fucking 5 days later, sorry, Sabine. But this is where I learned, you know, how to have stamina in facilitation. 5 days later, they'd come back and say, thank you. You've served me well. I've learned this thing. Now my heart soars with joy when I can support people in that way. I'm happy to take the punches if I can support the evolution of that. And this was in the context of race, in the context of all sorts of stuff. It just doesn't work in the same way. And I can't hold people, exactly as you say. And I suppose maybe that's the other part of the story, is people have to hold themselves more. So thank you. I want to just tell you a couple of points from today, just as closure, because I think we got some useful stuff. Sorry if I'm just moving on fast. Anthea, do you want to say something? Anyway, I'm not. So people have to hold themselves more, enable people to take responsibility for their own engagement, build in opportunities for autonomy, use relationships to keep a leaky container afloat. And we have this term in facilitation in our business, which is pain is inevitable, but misery is optional. So figure out what you're miserable about, and you know where the inevitable pain will come. the debates of between the group and the individual. In existential thinking, it's called horizontalization, which means you've got to get a view from everybody in the group. Do you need to do that on Zoom, or do you just popcorn it? The one thing we didn't talk about was the Zoom trance, but the tips around that were keep sending them off into breakaway groups, or putting videos on, or sending them to the toilet. Yeah, those are my notes. Thank you. It was a small group, but it was a hell of a good conversation, I felt. And Sabine, thank you for supporting me. Did you see I was so needy today?
What do you mean?
I've come in needy, so thank you. All right, I'll see you all later.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Lovely conversation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.